Hi all, welcome back to the channel. We're back on the internet together again today. We're talking housing, Australian property. It's always a main talking point amongst people in this country, and it's looking like another surge is coming. People will say, how can properties possibly go higher? How can people afford it? Well, we're going to find out. Let's jump into a few various different news reports and we'll talk through it.
Expanded home guarantee scheme will unlock almost double the number of homes and units available for first home buyers when it starts next month. That's according to new data released today by Cotality. And Cotality's head of research, Eliza Owen, joins us now with the details. Eliza, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We've had mentioned in that introduction this scheme is set to open a huge number of extra homes and units available for first home buyers. How do we know that?
Yeah, so we've done an analysis basically looking at the median values of houses and units across Australia and how many of them fit into the current price thresholds for the scheme versus the ones that kick in from October 1st. So basically what we've seen is an uplift of about 33% of markets going to over 62% of markets, including up to almost 94% of unit markets across Australia.
So what is that telling you? So I think it's good for first adopters. Okay, so people are saying, no, what's wrong with this, G-Man? Why is it a bad thing that the government is going to do the 5% property deposit scheme? Now, I think, as I said, it's good for early adopters, people who get in, they're market ready, and they're able to take advantage of it very, very quickly. But what's going to happen here is that all of that stock, i.e. properties that are available to people now due to this 5% deposit scheme that weren't previously available to those people, they're going to be soaked up, and then that watermark, right, that water level, that goes up permanently. Well, what do you mean? Why are the prices going to go up? Because more people are going to be more competitive in that market. So it's just supply and demand. So as I said, early adopters, people who get in quick, they're going to get in. But once again, all that's going to happen is now all those house prices are going to rise in that entry level market. You know, units, apartments, maybe some townhouses in various suburbs that were previously off limits. Well, it's all as I said, all it's going to do now is have an influx of people trying to get those properties. And what happens? People want something, people will pay more for it. Think about as well when people go out for mortgages, especially younger people or people who are tired, sick and tired of house hunting. It can be very laborious, very draining. You're looking at real estate all day. You're sending links to your girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife, whatever it may be. You're getting excited. You're seeing if you can afford it. You're speaking to mortgage brokers. You're driving around on weekends, weeknights, inspecting properties, all that sort of stuff. You're tired, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to just borrow the absolute max that you can, and you're going to get that house by hook or by crook. People aren't always, controlled when it comes to this purchase. It's an emotional purchase, and people will just go, you know what, we'll max out now, and we'll worry about it later. We'll pay it off over time. This is our leg into the market. So what does that do? People are maxing out. And I think a lot of people have this sentiment because people are going to rush in, and once again, makes it more expensive for everybody. And I won't say, well, it won't push up. People say, well, what about those expensive properties? I don't think it's going to have any impact on that at this point in time. Interest rate cuts will have an impact on those. This is more around entry-level properties. And once again, we're talking about first home buyers. That always doesn't mean young people. It means people of all ages who haven't either wanted to or been in a position to buy a property. They're going to be the ones fighting tooth and nail over limited stock.
Eliza, everyone wants, a solution to the housing crisis, especially for so many first home buyers. But there are concerns this scheme may get first home buyers into dangerous levels of debt and may actually increase the prices of homes and units. Do you agree with that?
I think the debt piece is definitely something that first home buyers need to be aware of, because the flip side of a 5% deposit is a 95% loan to valuation ratio on the property.
This particular woman's style of talking does my head in. I don't know what it is about her. I mean, she's very well spoken, but I don't know. She talks like you're 4 years old. So you got, yeah, of course, this is a huge problem as well. But on the inverse of that, all right, the bank isn't going to lend you money if they haven't done the serviceability checks on that 95% of geared debt that you can cover it. I think it's about 2.5 or 3% buffer on top of existing interest rates, which is still relatively high compared to what it's been recently, over recent years. I'm not going to talk about the historical average. So I think if you're going to get it now, all it's going to do is lock people into lives of frugality. Not so much ruin, because interest rates aren't looking like, at this point in time, anything can happen. Who knows what's going to happen? Interest rates aren't going up again anytime soon, in my opinion. They're on the way down. You might get 2 or 3 more cuts. Some people say cuts are done. Who knows, right? We're all speculating. No one knows what's going to happen in the future. So what's it going to do? It's just going to lock people into a life of debt slavery at overly inflated asset prices for units and apartments. And I've been talking about this for the last 6 months. And I've had people make comments on my videos that I don't know nothing and I know nothing about property and blah, blah, blah. So what I have been saying is now starting to happen. And this is what will happen. Also, you'll have more people leveraging the bank of mum and dad. The bank of mum and dad are like, all right, they got a 5% deposit needed. All right, we can scrounge up 50 grand and give it to them. Instead of, families who be more affluent, mum and dad who might have a couple of $100 grand, they can just drop it, to the son or daughter. 50 grand is a little bit more in reach. So there'll be more of that as well. So there's going to be more people lining up and competing on these property prices. But the main thing here, and this is the thing I want to stress, isn't so much pushing up the entry-level property prices. That's going to happen. I think the bigger theme here is people getting into, as I said, highly leveraged situations without really thinking about what that is. As I said, it's an emotional purchase. But once you buy that house and once you move in, you deck it out, you get some furniture and all that sort of stuff, it becomes very apparent once the excitement wears off that you're stuck with this overhanging huge debt over your head, and you have to pay that by hook or by crook, or you're on the street, or you're losing your house and back trying to fend in the rental market. So it becomes a huge source of stress for a lot of people. Huge source of financial stress. You don't feel like you can spend any of your money on yourself. It can affect people's relationships with each other, because one person might want to be frugal and put all the money down on the mortgage. The other person still wants to spend money like they don't have a mortgage. These things happen, right? So that's it's going to be a huge lifestyle hit.
Having said that, you do still have to pass bank serviceability tests to get the loan. There's no guarantee that if you get the part in the scheme, you can actually qualify for the mortgage. So that's going to be one protection for first home buyers. But I think, like you say, where the scheme does get let down is that it will probably push up values by increasing demand up to these price thresholds.
So what would your advice be for first home buyers right now with this new scheme coming on board?
So really understand that the scheme is about taking on additional debt, which can cost you more over the life of the loan than if you put down the 20% deposit. But if you're going to...
I don't know how this needs to be said. How does this need to be said? You're borrowing more money, you got to pay more money back. That's going to compound quite significantly over the years, especially if you're not financially disciplined and you're not just dropping all your money on the mortgage and trying to knock the thing off in half the time. You're going to be paying way more interest, even on that extra 15%. That, as I said, it compounds year on year. So I don't know why that needs to be said. Borrow more money, you need to pay more money back, takes longer to pay back, affects your lifestyle for longer. But again, what's the alternative? Because it isn't like there's a lot of rental properties out there for people. People are trying to rush in and buy houses because they're sick and tired of being at mercy of the rental market. Not so much even the cost, that's one factor. But it's the instability of it. The instability and, okay, you might get a place, but what happens then if you have to move out? You're back on the market fighting a tooth and nail against a lot of people for the same properties. That's what it is.
Be spending that extra time saving in the rental market, which is very expensive in Australia now, the cost benefit could work out. So you've just got to consider your individual circumstance. And I think from a policy perspective, it's clear that we've got to move beyond the demand side schemes because we can't rely on them to actually improve affordability.
such a big issue affecting so many people. Eliza, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks
Good on you, Eliza. Let's move on. Halfway through, if you're enjoying this content, I know I've been touching some touchy subjects over the last few days. I'm going to pull back from that. And there's a lot of people covering all that stuff. So let's keep it a bit more Australian homegrown issues type stuff. So once again, subscribe to the channel, like, comment, share. If the hype button is there in your comments, if you're on a mobile device, you have to swipe left or right on the comments section. Press the hype button. It does help me out and help me get out there. Also, feel free to put in the comments any suggestions for things you may want to hear about. I'm open. It's community, trying to make content everyone wants to watch. Let's do it. And I know people who work in real estate, and I've been hearing this since about February or March. People who are market ready, they have been getting in. They've been trying to get in and pick up the good properties. What is a perceived discount? Now I'm talking here in Melbourne, right? Melbourne, Victoria. Melbourne's been quite depressed in terms of its property growth over the last few years. More or less, you take into account inflation, it's more or less gone sideways, or actually probably gone down. It's now starting to have a resurgence because people are realising now, after all the other capital cities have overtaken Melbourne in terms of property price, median price, however they calculate it, it's starting to look like value. Now, the only thing is, if you're an investor investing in Melbourne, it's not very good. I wouldn't highly recommend that at all. Land taxes, are going to get you. They're going to get you. So keep that in mind. Because State Revenue Office, they're loving it at the moment, the old COVID levy. They reckon it's for 10 years. I think it's going to stay permanently. That's my point of view. Once a tax comes in, they aren't letting it go. They'll find another reason to keep that land tax inflated. So my tip, Melbourne, I'm going to give it over the next sort of 2 years. It's going to have a boom period. But as I said, what do I know? I'm just a punter as well, right? Just like you guys. This is just all the tea leaves. I'm reading the tea leaves. I'm hearing about sentiment on the ground. And I'm watching a lot of these reports about people getting FOMO, gearing up. So think about anyone who's thinking about getting into the market. It's been painful for people who actually currently had mortgages, those interest rate increases. It hurts because the quantum of debt is a lot higher than what it was previously. So people will say, oh, well, G-Man, 6.4% or 6.2% or whatever the rates are now. That's actually along the average the last 20 or 30 years. Yeah, that's fine. But, in 1990 or the early 2000s, debt wasn't $1 million, right? The required borrowing wasn't $1 million. It was $200,000 or $100,000. So even if you factor in, CPI, indexation, all that sort of stuff, it's hurting people a lot more than what it ever has. Now, yeah, they say there's lower interest rates. We've had a few cuts. It's good. It has relieved a lot of pressure, but it isn't like it's made it that much easier. But that's what I'm saying. So that's what I was going to say. So what's another factor? Right, I lost my thought there for a moment. So what's another factor of people who weren't getting into the market? Well, they're like, they don't know if rates are going to go up or not. And they're like, well, if rates keep going up, maybe the properties prices will go down. Sellers will have to be more realistic on what they're trying to sell the house for, or they might be under pressure as investors who can't hold it anymore, etc. So people have been standing on the sidelines. Now that pendulum has swung. We're on the easing curve. And so, more people are like, you know what, I better get in now before there are more cuts and then more people come in. Because with every cut, that is another threshold of people, even if it might be a small amount, that's another threshold of people who are able to get into the market, who might have just been missing out on the serviceability tests. That's astronomical. Just think about it. $2 million, like $2 million. We're very desensitized to just how much money we actually throw at property. I recall even 20 years ago when I started looking at property and getting interested in it, like $1 million, if you spend $1 million on a house, that was, well, you're definitely getting $1 million worth of house. You get $2 million now, depending on where it is. Like even in Sydney, $3-4 million to get a cream brick house on a 500 metre block in a normal suburb that might be within closer proximity to the city, 3 or 4 million. So people are dropping that sort of cash. People have got it. I have this argument with a good friend of mine all the time. He's like, well, people just can't afford to buy it. It's going to go to a point where If we go to $10 million, who's going to buy it? As I said, there are people out there with a lot of money. They're the ones buying them. The average punter, even white-collar professionals, now it's a struggle. Think about it. Back even 10 years ago, you got two white-collared people. I'm just using this as an example because on average, they'll earn more money than, say, an unskilled worker. And they can generally get a place just about wherever you want. If you're on six figures, two people on six figures. Now that is absolutely required. Two people on six figures-ish to have a chance at getting in at a place that you may want to live in, not 2 hours away. It's just incredible what's happened. You just got to sometimes step back and just think, $2 million, like that's $2 million for some brick. Overpaid, that was expensive. Okay. Go 5 or 10 years in the future, people are telling you got to steal. It's the same old story. Everyone feels like they overpay because when you go to an auction for a property that people want, it's going to go for at least put at least 10% on top of the band that they quote. At least you're talking about emotions here. Once again, people are sick and tired of going around every Tuesday, Thursday nights. They're open for inspections. They're tired of driving around on Saturday mornings, going to all of the opens, and then also checking out local auctions, trying to get a vibe. It's a full-time time commitment. They're tired of it. They're just going to pay. Well, how can people afford it? There are different ways the banks are going to go around doing this. So they'll increase the tenure of the debt, which means that the mortgage length. Okay, I think initially, before my time, before I started looking at property, I think it was 15-year mortgages. Then it was 20. Then it was 25. It's currently at 30 is the max loan. That's what most people will buy on a 30-year horizon. They're going to have to move them to 40 soon or 35. It's just going to have to happen so people can actually get into the market. That's the way they do it. They start, they tweak the system around. Keep it going. Keep the good times going. Keep that gravy train going. I said, I love property. I'm not anti-property. It's this is just a bit of an analysis of what's going to happen. So let's see. And now we're going to watch one more quickly. All right. And we're going to get Sky News' view on it.
We hear incessantly that makes me scratch my head and just wonder. It's that first home buyers today have got it much, much tougher than people in previous generations.
It is, mate.
But somehow we owe it to the first home buyers of today to give them more support and to get them into the housing markets. So 5% deposits guaranteed by the government. Sure thing. Stamp duty exemptions from the states. No worries at all. But I do vaguely remember buying my own home, the first one. It was bloody tough getting a deposit together.
Oh, come on,
Two
mate.
incomes. They were essential to pay off the first stages of a mortgage. So is it that my memory's poor?
Yes.
Or is it really tougher today for first home buyers? Angus Moore is a senior economist at REA Group. He's been working on this.
All right. So I've had this very conversation with people of Paul's age range a number of times. I'm probably in the middle, right? People call me a boomer. I'm middle-aged. So I am in the market. And even back when I bought my place, very expensive. To me, I felt like that's it. I'm trapped in a life of debt, which is basically true. Like, that's just the reality of most people, right? We go to work and we pay tax, we pay a mortgage, we finally pay the mortgage off, and then we die. All right, that's more or less it. But I've had this argument. It gets harder all the time. It's getting harder every single year. Why? Because wage growth isn't catching up. We have far more demand for property now than what was previously experienced. And due to that demand, property prices have gone through the roof. I had this exact argument with someone I know, and this particular person said, oh, well, I bought my house in 1978, and it was really tough. I know young people now, they're just spoiled. They're buying iPhones, they're going on holidays, they're going out and buying coffees, they go out for breakfast, all that sort of standard stuff. And yeah, that does play a factor, but not as much of a factor as that it'll change overall the ability to be able to buy a house. And so I said, oh, what did you buy your house for? And he said something like 35 grand or something like that. So I got the calculator out and I said, how long did it take you to pay off? And he goes, well, him and his wife at the time, they both worked really, really hard and they paid the house off in 5 years. Now, and this is in a Melbourne suburb, by the way, inner Melbourne. Now, the house will be worth millions now. 5 years, crunchy, because people just don't want to work hard like that anymore. And I said, no, it's just not possible. Unless you're both making 500 grand a year or 300 grand a year each, you're not paying off a house in 5 years. It's just not happening. He goes, oh, I don't, I'm not buying it. And I said, all right. So I pulled out the inflation calculator and I put the numbers in. And it was around, I calculated what the house price in today's dollars would be. It's about $150,000, $140,000. Now, it could be off with the price that he said. It was somewhere about $40,000, something like that, back in 1978. So I said, hang on, think about buying a house now for $150,000. That's today's value of the dollar. You can't buy a room. You can't buy a back shed. So that argument does not stack up. And as I said, I'm not... I have on this channel before smacked people over the head for whinging about property and all that sort of stuff. But you can't look someone straight in the face and say it was just as hard back in 1980 or 1990 or 1975 or even early 2000s to buy a property. It wasn't. Everyone works hard, yes, but their memory might be fine, but they're not in today's market. So there's no comparison. That's my rant on that. What do you guys think?
I spoke with him late this week.
Yeah, that's right. And thanks so much for having me, Russ. I think when we think about affordability for first home buyers, it's really important to think about two different concepts. So one is what we call affordability, which is essentially, can you service the mortgage on the home that you buy? And this depends on the home price, obviously, but it also crucially depends on interest rates. So that's part one. And then part two is the deposit burden. And this really just depends on how expensive is the home that you want to buy relative to your income and your wealth.
So, Angus, on that front, that means, is it challenging? Because it seems today that the issue of trying to accumulate the deposit is the big issue for many home buyers.
Spot on.
Yeah, that's right. The big thing that's changed if we look over the last 4 or 5 decades is it is just much harder to save a 20% deposit than it used to be. Home prices have risen much faster than incomes over sort of decades. And what that means is if you're trying to save out of your income, it takes a lot longer. To put some numbers around that, if you were an average income household trying to save a 20% deposit for a median price home across Australia at the moment, it takes about 6 years. That's about twice as long as what it was even in
6 years. I mean, we're talking medians here. I think it would be double that. It really, where are we talking? Most people are in the cities. This is median, right? Most people are in the cities, Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney. Now, particularly, I'm not even talking about Sydney because that's played 20 years now for the average punter. But even Melbourne and Brisbane, I'll say you have to be 10 years. It doesn't sound right, 6 years. Maybe 6 years for a couple, stashing all their cash away, while also paying rent and all that sort of stuff.
In the 1990s, and certainly much longer than was true in, say, the 1970s or 1980s. The important caveat here, though, is most first-home buyers don't save a 20% deposit. Many buy with smaller deposits than that. In fact, about 3 in 10 buy with a 10% deposit or less. So it's certainly not a necessity to save up all 20% of that deposit.
Okay, so then if we think about in the past, the irony is that interest rates would have been higher in those days than what they were today, which made it easier to accumulate the deposit because people with their savings were able to earn higher rates of interest.
Now, come on, Paul. Come on, mate. Even in the early 2000s, you could buy houses for $300,000 in middle ring suburbs. 300, 400K. Now, let's just do the maths on that.
So in other words, the low interest rates that have helped people to actually buy more of a mortgage these days and boost home prices also works against them building that deposit.
Yeah, exactly right. And in fact, that's the thing that's changed. If we look over the last 4 or 5 decades, interest rates just are structurally lower today than they used to be and less volatile. We go back to the 1990s, you had mortgage rates north of 15%. Mortgage affordability and serviceability, so that other part of, when we think about housing affordability, was obviously extraordinarily challenging at that point. It was extremely hard to service a mortgage. Now today,
I want to see the comparison between, say, maybe one year ago and that time that they're talking about. I think it's harder now. Yes, the interest rate is lower. It was like 6% or 6.5% or whatever it was. The lending rates. But the debt's 10 times higher or 5 times higher, so it hurts. It hurts. People say, oh, well, no, what about, the 17% in 1993? Yeah, well, the houses were 120 grand, mate. There's no comparison. And your debt was probably 80 grand. Now, people have 800 grand debt. And even that's going to be seen as low debt soon, the way things are going.
With mortgage rates much lower than that, it's probably nearly as hard to service a mortgage as it was back then, just because home prices are so much higher than they were. Though it's probably not quite as hard. It is still probably the case that 1990 was harder to service the mortgage. But the fact that rates are lower means home prices are higher relative to incomes, and that's a big part of why the deposit burden is so much larger today.
Okay, so let's go back to that era when interest rates got above 15%. They peaked at 17%, as you know. I paid them. But at that point in time, there was also mass unemployment. Unemployment got out above 10%. Unemployment today is just barely above 4%. So the whole issue was that there were a whole bunch of people who got spat out of the mortgage market, the home owning market, because they lost their jobs. And that, I wonder, is really sort of in some ways a protection for home buyers today.
Exactly right. We know that one of the biggest predictors of mortgage default and mortgage arrears is job loss. While obviously the enormous increase in interest rates that we've seen and strain on household budgets that we've seen has been a real challenge for a lot of people, it is possible to juggle that increase in costs. What's not possible to juggle is completely losing your income. And so with unemployment very low at the moment, that risk of job loss is much lower. And so we're seeing...
I don't know. It's just interesting how they show unemployment. I'd love to know all the calculations if it was the same as it was back then, because I'm very sceptical of that. And I'm not going to rant for too long on it, but I know a lot of people who've been put out of work, they've been sidelined, they're put on furlough, they've been having reduced hours, maybe lost jobs in industries that are suffering pretty bad right now. There's quite a few of them out there. So I think there's a lot of people struggling and really stressing about money and stuff like that. Anyway, look, I'm going to leave it there. I've been ranting for long enough about this topic. Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.